The Greeks of antiquity were great indulgers and led far more liberal societies than our own. We are all such prudes in comparison to the Greeks. Given that the Greek gods enjoyed a wide range of pleasures, for example, Zeus changed into various animals to entice women, why should the Athenians be any different? These odd beliefs held by the Greeks seem absurd to us in our times. Gory, old-fashioned wrestling. Men have wrestled for sport ever since they learned to walk upright. Men engaged in wrestling are depicted on wall murals from ancient Egypt, which date back more than 4,000 years. Boxing is shown on broken ceramic pieces found on the islands of Santorini. There is a considerable evidence that fighting sports have been popular for almost the entire duration of recorded history, dating back to the 16th century BC. There were 3 primary fighting sports in classical Greece. The first was boxing, which in 688 BC was recognized as an Olympic sport. However, these boxing bouts differed from contemporary bouts in that they lacked judges and points. Boxers pounded each other until someone was knocked out or gave up, so decisions were never made in the middle of a fight. Boxers wore thin leather bands called hemantes to protect their hands. It was violent and bloody. Wrestling was the second most popular sport in ancient Greece. There were no weight divisions or duration restrictions, and 2 men were locked in a ring for hours on end, with the men getting too tired to support themselves. In ancient Greece, a wrestler had to hurl his opponent to the ground 3 times in order to win. Though there weren't many regulations, you could win by breaking your opponent's fingers, among other things. Pankration was the third sport played. It was essentially a hybrid of Greek mixed martial arts, boxing, and wrestling. Combatants could knee one another and utilize leg sweeps and kicks, but there was no eye gouging or biting, just like in contemporary mixed martial arts. In 684 BC, this was recognized as an Olympic sport, and winners were occasionally made into gods. Reportedly passionate in pankration, historians have conjectured that during his conquests in Asia, Alexander the Great introduced mixed martial arts to the region. The Festival of Fertility. Large crowds of people gather in the streets of Athens each year to reenact a historic fertility celebration. There are hundreds of phallic items involved in what is known as the Phaloria. The festival honors Dionysus, the deity of revelry, intoxication, insanity, and sensual pleasure. People dress in pagan attire and wear large necklaces made of the male organ. Greeks honor fertility and the phallus by marching through the streets. Although it is an annual event in Greece, its origins date back thousands of years. According to historians, more than 2,000 years ago, followers of Dionysus marched through Athens while wearing satyr costumes and sipping wine. It was known as the Dionysia Festival in ancient Greece. It probably began as a method to honor the growing of grapevines in rural areas. It might even have started before Dionysus was a god. It functioned as a sort of purging in larger towns. It was an event where people could let their inhibitions go and become inebriated. It was revived roughly 200 years ago by the Greeks after a period of absence. Gross medicine. About 800 BC, Greek medicine began to take shape. Then, when philosophers started to mold Greece into a society of thinkers by the 6th century BC, medical advancements continued. However, not all treatments made sense, even after centuries of advancements in medicine. Just look at Hippocrates, the father of medicine. He was born in 460 BC on the island of Kos and had a profound impact on medical history. You've undoubtedly heard of the Hippocratic Oath, which dates back 2,400 years and requires doctors to serve everyone in need. The theory of the 4 humors was developed by him. He felt that there were 4 substances that could explain everything in the body: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Every material had a relationship with one of the 4 primary components. Maintaining the ideal balance of the 4 humors was the only way to keep the body healthy. Although a start towards contemporary medicine, it was still entirely incorrect. Phlegm was associated with water, black bile with the earth, blood with the air, and yellow bile with the fire. The four humors theory served as the cornerstone of medicine for 2 millennia. It was believed that a person's illness indicated a problem with one of their humors. For instance, medical professionals started to believe that patients with fever, edema, or any other condition involving warmth had an excessive amount of blood in their bodies. The doctor would attempt to draw blood if you had a fever in order to allow your humors to return to normal. Sadly, this frequently led to fatal bleeding episodes, such as toothaches that resulted in swollen mouths. Excruciating hair removal. Shaving off body hair while facing a mirror is by no means a new trend. For thousands of years, people have been using strange techniques to get rid of hair from different places on their bodies. The Greeks were infamous for their obsession with skin devoid of hair. The ideal body for the Greeks was hairless. They aspired to resemble flawless, living marble statues. Men used sharp flint chips to shave their faces. To remove individual hairs from the scalp, Greeks employed seashells as a substitute for their antiquated tweezers. They used to rip out hair by the root by taking 2 shells, pressing them together. But these techniques weren't exclusive to the Greeks. Hair was pulled out by many societies using whatever tools they could find. The Greeks were different in that they employed debilitary creams to take it a step further. These were lotions that were applied to the entire body with the purpose of removing hair. The problem was that these creams had hazardous components when they were created thousands of years ago. It may go horribly wrong if the cream was not combined well or if you received a faulty batch. Burning off the skin might leave victims with ghastly illnesses. Hair was linked to poverty in ancient Greece, since the only way to be hairless was to be wealthy enough to buy cosmetics. In ancient Greece, someone with hairy arms or a beard was seen strolling down the street was probably a slave or extremely impoverished. The Herostratus damnation. Herostratus was the man the Greeks despised so much that it was forbidden to mention his name aloud. The story starts in the year 1000 BC, when a party of immigrants from Athens crossed the Mediterranean Sea to create the Turkish city of Ephesus. The goddess of chastity, hunting, and wild animals, Artemis, was their favorite. It is reported that the construction of the colossal shrine in her honor took 100 years. The goddess's temple was so magnificent that the historian Herodotus included it as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was positioned next to the Colossus of Rhodes and the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Artemisium temple was purportedly 425 feet long and about 100 feet tall. According to the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder, the roof was supported by 127 columns adorned with enormous statues of Artemis. The Artemisium was destroyed in 356 BC when Herostratus broke into the temple at night and set it on fire. It was said that in an era of legends and heroes, he was seeking notoriety. Herostratus wished for his evil conduct to live on in perpetuity. After capturing him, the city's officials concluded that his death would not be sufficient to destroy their magnificent temple. Herostratus was condemned to death, of course, but he was also given a strange punishment known as damnatio memoriae. It was against the law to mention his name anywhere after that, either in writing or speech. It was obviously ineffective in its attempt to permanently remove his name from the globe. Historical adultery. Women did not enjoy nearly as many rights in ancient Greece as the myths appear to imply. Greek mythology abounds with tales of formidable female characters, chiefly the Olympus deities. In actuality, though, women belonged to men in ancient Greece. This is particularly true in terms of marriage, as a man's wife was seen as his property in ancient Greece. For example, it was considered damage to the man's property if a woman was harmed in an assault. The offense was handled as though the woman's guardian had been harmed, even if she wasn't married. Offenders would face the same penalties as if they had taken animals. It was one thing to damage a man's property, but there was worse. Greek women were indifferent to physical violence, but they became quite upset when a woman cheated. In Greece, adultery was regarded as one of the most heinous crimes. If a lady was discovered having an affair with another guy, she would immediately get a divorce and the man would be executed. Why did Greeks see infidelity with greater concern than acts of violence? It all had to do with the way they perceived the world. For the Greeks, lying and adultery were considered to be more sinister than violence. Greek males were known for engaging in behaviors that modern people might think weird. Two guys could have affairs and it would be perfectly acceptable, as long as it wasn't the wife of another man. Men could essentially sleep with anybody they pleased. Cheating was viewed as a cunning and unimaginable attempt to turn a lady against her family. There was also a possibility that the adulterous couple would give birth to children who were not their own. Overall, people viewed adultery as a threat to society, but they didn't mind males hooking up with other men or assaults. The unibrow. While eyebrow fashions are ever evolving in tandem with contemporary culture, there is one eyebrow style that hasn't been seen in generations. I am referring to the unibrow. Simply put, it hasn't been in style for a very long time and probably won't be anytime soon. However, if you had been alive in ancient Greece, you would have noticed unibrows everywhere. Athens' female population was deeply fixated with sporting the biggest, boldest unibrows available for purchase. Women would let their eyebrows grow large and bushy, then add soot to make them stand out even more in an attempt to create the perfect unibrow. There were many other bizarre eyebrow fads in existence. For example, threading one's eyebrows before social media by thousands of years in ancient Persia. In ancient Persia, women were engaged to be married and had their eyebrows totally plucked when they became adults. They also used threads to brush their hair as a signal of adulthood. Persians were also big on mustaches, and their views on beauty were extremely similar for both sexes. It would have been usual to see young people with no hair at all, save for a sparse mustache and unusually dark eyebrows. Racism. 8,500 ballots were discovered in a landfill in Athens during archaeological excavations in the 1960s. The ballots were broken bits of earthenware that were utilized as shreds of paper. The trash was dated to approximately 471 BC. They were a part of an incredible tradition that would be unimaginable in contemporary culture, rather than being utilized in any election. The votes were cast as part of an initiative known as ostracism, which aimed to ban a politician from the city for the ensuing 10 years. The Greeks may decide to vote their politicians into exile if they were tired of them. It was a brief process, lasting only about a century, but what a magnificent period of time it was. It was a negative popularity contest, according to Florida State University historian James Sickinger, and it probably started as a means of removing despots before they got ingrained in the political system. When Athenians could take no more of someone in authority acting against their good, they assembled. The politician would be forced to leave the city and go into exile if a sufficient number of voters to cast yes votes, in addition to being ousted from office. They were prohibited from returning for 10 years. Racism only existed in ancient Athens during the height of democracy. This century stood apart from all others in world history because it saw women, enslaved laborers, and foreigners able to exercise their right to vote and hold their government accountable. Anyone who was growing too strong or influential and failing to act honorably towards Athenians risked being shunned. It was effective up until officials from the government stopped it. Sacred prostitution. Greek historian Herostratus was alive somewhere between 484 and 413 BC. Herostratus is largely responsible for the wealth of knowledge that exists today in Greek culture. He penned the Histories, a lengthy work that covered customs from the periphery of Greece to the Persian Empire. This 2,400-year-old book has provided a wealth of knowledge on pre-Roman Europe's myths, stories, and unusual events. A bizarre practice that Herostratus described in this book was referred to as sacred prostitution. Herostratus claims that the great temple of Aphrodite was the location of its practice. At some point in her life, every woman in the city was required to go to the temple and sell her body to an unknown person. The first man to toss money into the woman's lap would commit the deed with her. There was no set amount that had to be paid. Following the conclusion of their conversation, the guy headed home and the woman exited the temple. She was deemed to have fulfilled her religious duty. Susie Lamb, An archaeological student at University College Dublin claims to have evidence of holy prostitution dating back 8,000 years. It was always centered on a fertility or love goddess, Aphrodite in ancient Greece and Babylon. The trade served as a complete act of worship. It can be compared to a custom in which women sold their bodies to pay homage to the goddess. Even if they only did it once, Aphrodite was satisfied.